Joining us now, Jamal Abdi, president of the National Iranian American Council. Thanks for being with us today, Jamal.
Absolutely.
First of all, are you hearing news of any reports on the ground? What's coming out today? I understand some phone lines are now open.
Still very limited information. Landlines appear to be working for calls coming out of Iran, still not for calls coming into Iran. So the information on the ground is sort of coming at a trickle.
But the protests, as we understand, are still continuing, and one could only assume, but we don't like to, that that means the crackdown is as well?
Well, my understanding is that the protests have significantly diminished for the time being. The mass killings seem to have deterred people from coming out into the streets. So I think there have been some sporadic, smaller events, but we haven't seen a second surge of protests like we saw over the weekend.
When you hear President Trump or read President Trump tweet, "Help is on the way," what do you make of that?
Well, I really hope he knows what he's doing, because he's essentially encouraging Iranians to go out, put their lives on the line, take provocative actions that, as we've seen, will lead to a violent response. And the ability for the United States to actually meaningfully change dynamics on the ground is pretty limited unless Trump wants to seriously invest in military action and boots on the ground. So from my understanding, what has been considered is, first, he imposed tariffs on Iran yesterday, and that he's looking at potentially non-kinetic options such as cyber attacks, doing more to try to get internet into Iran. But I'm just concerned that, when people hear he and others saying help is on the way, the United States is going to be this savior. If the United States is not actually willing to invest in that, which I think is also very fraught, but that these promises are being made and there's not actually an ability for the United States to protect Iranians from more killings, or has any plan for what happens if and when they take some small, potentially symbolic action. If that doesn't produce results, then what happens to Iranians?
If the Ayatollah Khomeini regime were to fall, if that were to happen, is it clear, in the vacuum of power that would then ensue, who would take the reins of the country?
It's really not clear. You can look to some of the power centers really within the existing regime structure, particularly the Revolutionary Guard, the sort of revolutionary military force has a lot of economic power, obviously significant, guns and monopoly on violence. So you could see a situation where they step into the fray. There has been talk about others within the regime sort of ushering Khamenei out, and then there being sort of almost like a Venezuela option. And then you have outside opposition groups, people like Reza Pahlavi, who are making these calls for people to put their bodies on the line. I don't necessarily see any structure or organization in place that would enable somebody like that to then go into Iran and rule. I think the big fear is that there is no plan. There is no structure. What could be potentially a transition government inside of Iran, most of the activists and civil society are silenced and in prison and have not been able to form those organizations. And so that all kind of spells out into what could be an even more violent and uncertain situation. And I think the greatest fear is some sort of state collapse and violence that tears the country apart on sectarian or political lines.
Definitely a tumultuous time right now in Iran, and by some accounts, 10,000 arrests already and likely rising. Jamal Abdi, president of the National Iranian American Council, we thank you for your time.
Thank you.